You did not inherit a generational curse. What you inherited is a generational operating system, a set of emotional responses, behaviors, actions, and identity patterns that have been passed down through your family line without ever being questioned or updated. You see, what most people call a generational curse is really just unconscious programming that's running on repeat generation after generation. And here's the powerful truth. You are the first in your bloodline with the awareness to see it, name it, and reprogram it. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how that system works and what you can do to break that cycle. By the end of this video, you're going to understand the 4 layers of generational programming that's running inside you and the 5 steps to sever them permanently. Most people think that a generational curse is some kind of magic spell that was bestowed upon them from somebody out there, right? Some kind of evil magic spell or some kind of spiritual punishment from past lives, and now they have to deal with it here, right? Their family is just destined to never succeed because there's some kind of spiritual thing that's going on, that's happening and that's happened. And so then now they're stuck with this curse in their life and they can't do anything about it, right? But there's also the bad luck. A lot of people think that they're just naturally unlucky people and that through their family, through their lineage, they've always been unlucky and it's just a thing that's happened to them. And the thing is, that's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. They have been thinking that they don't have good luck, and so they always have bad luck. And so it just continues to be passed on from generation to generation, right? And then people think that it's some kind of hex, right? Like some kind of hex was put on them. But here's the thing. None of these are actually what a curse is. And so when we look at the magic spell, what really this is here is just an inherited emotional OS. So emotional operating system. And this is how you process your emotions, how your emotions affect you in terms of your behavior, your actions, whether you think something is a negative thing, a positive thing, right? All of those factor into your emotions in terms of how you are experiencing them and then how you are attaching meaning to each emotion that you go through. And with the spiritual punishment, this is really just learned survival patterns. Okay? Set of patterns that you learned from your family, from your surroundings in terms of how to survive, how to make sure that you are able to stay alive and not do too much, not do too little, but just kind of stay in the middle, don't cause too much trouble, and just, make sure that you're alive and well. But that also is very limited, right? Because it doesn't allow you to step outside your comfort zone because nobody else in your family has, right? So you're going to follow that. And then when it comes to bad luck, this is unconscious identity programming. Okay? So this is really all this is here in terms of the entire curse, right? What a curse actually is. So it's not a magic spell. It's not magic, right? It's inherited emotional operating system that you have taken in from your family, right? From your parents, from your environment, from the people around you, so that you react a certain way to certain things because they reacted a certain way to certain things. So you're taking that on. It's not spiritual punishment. There's no hex here. It's just a learned survival patterns that allowed you to stay alive, right? Don't get too involved into things. Don't put yourself out there too much because you can have disappointment. You can have all these things happen to you, right? But then also, unfortunately, this leads to not really bettering yourself or stepping outside your comfort zone because nobody else in your family has, right? So you're adopting that. And then the unconscious identity programming, this is the bad luck, right? This is not, bad luck isn't one of those things where it's just like passed down and you're just a person that's unlucky. This is all a self-fulfilling prophecy and it's unconscious identity programming. And so ultimately, what a curse is just an inherited emotional operating system. Learn survival strategies that helped your parents, your great-grandparents survive and just continue on the lineage and the unconscious programming of your identity through the stories that your family told you about who you are and who they are, right? Like, we're a family that does X. We're a family that does Y. We don't do A, B, and C. So then that was unconsciously programmed into you. And it's been repeated so many times that it became your reality without you ever being able to question it. But here's the key insight that I want you to take away in terms of a curse, okay? You are living inside a story that started before you were born. Okay, so this story has been perpetuated through generations, right? Without you ever being able to question it. And especially with your family, right? Like most people will have better relationships with their mother or their father in terms of maybe they gravitate more towards the father figure, and then some will gravitate more towards the mother figure. Typically, it tends to be the opposites in terms of a son will oftentimes build a stronger relationship with the mother. It's not always the case, right? But for the most part, you have both of the parents that have their own inherited operating systems, and then those get passed down to you. Now, I can speak from my experience in terms of I grew up from a very traditional Hispanic Mexican household where my family really always talked about working hard, going to school, get an education, make sure that you read your books, your studies, make sure you get the best grades, make sure that you can go to school and get an education, because that is the pinnacle of success. Because we came here from another country, from Mexico, and all we really knew was, hey, let's get ahead, let's work hard, right? And more often than not, it was about working hard physically, right? Physical manual labor. So, but the point here is that with my family, a lot of those things were inherited to me as well, in terms of, hey, don't do too much, don't step out of your comfort zone, don't get into too much trouble. Like, just make sure you do what you need to do, but don't put yourself out there too much. You don't want to get into any kind of trouble. You don't want to get into any type of disappointment. Just follow the path, which is going to school, get an education, get a good job, and that is going to be the pinnacle of success for you, right? And so all of these different beliefs and narratives in terms of, hey, don't put yourself out there, right? Just follow the straight and narrow path. Don't question things, right? Everybody else has done it this way. All of those I inherited, right? So then I had to question those and ask myself, well, what's going on here, right? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that, right? And so all of this led me to question everything. And by the way, most of the learned behavior starts from like 0 to 7 years old, okay? Now, it can be 0 to 5, but 0 to 7 is really, from my research and from my analysis, in terms of the most of the absorption happens from your family, because children don't typically do what you tell them. They'll do what they see you do. So a lot of the information is really learned and gathered here within the first 7 years. And so all of those programmings, right, that happen in terms of how you process your emotions, how you perceive the world, how you think about yourself in terms of your identity, who you are, the narratives, the stories that you tell yourself, the environments that you're in, right? Think about it from the Mexican side in terms of our culture, and really the Hispanic culture, Latino culture as a whole. We're really much so into family, right? Like, we have really big families and big, huge family events like every weekend. And when you really start to kind of think outside the box and you start to separate yourself and go a different path, that's when the family starts to question things like, hey, what's going on with Juan? What's going on with so-and-so? Why are they doing ABC? Why are they stepping outside of our natural comfort zone, right? They're not typically saying that, but they're thinking that, like, what is he doing? What is she doing? Like, what's going on here, right? That's not the natural order of how we go about things here, right? So all of these different things, they're all inherited, and they're not necessarily good and they're not necessarily bad, but it's really about just you thinking about, is this something that I want for me, right? Because they learned this programming that they pass on to you from their parents, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just been passed down from generation to generation because that's what they thought was the best way to experience reality. And so it's just naturally inherited. And the great thing for you is that you're watching this video. So now you get to become aware of what really a generational curse is, right? It's not necessarily that in and of itself of it being some kind of spell or hex or just bad luck. It's really just an operating system that you've been running without question because you were unaware. But then in this video, I'm going to show you the system that's been running underneath everything. So let me go ahead and erase the board here. Okay, so let me show you this loop. So it goes like this, more like this, okay, like this, and like this, okay? So it's really 7 components. So let's break these down here. So the first one here is your parents' emotional operating system, what they inherited, what they grew up with as well from their parents, right? It's not necessarily good or bad, it's just what they were passed down when they grew up. So the parents' OS then leads to the parents' behavior, okay? Which then leads to the child's environment, right? So the parents' behavior affects the child's environment because they're seeing what the parents are doing, typically going to be emulating what they see the parents do, not necessarily what the parents are actually saying. And so then this factors into the child's identity, and it's built based off of the original parent's operating system coming into the parent's behavior, right? The actions, activity, and then it leads into the child's environment growing up, typically 0 to 7 years old, right? This is where the most is absorbed, right? The first 7 years, then goes into the child's identity, and then the child becomes an adult, and then this creates adult patterns that child learned and absorbed here within the first 7 years, which then gives them their identity, and then now they have their own adult patterns that they developed and learned, which then leads to a repeated reality, right? In terms of the initial parent's operating system, this all looping together, right? It just creates a whole entire cycle, which then is passed on to next generation. So this is essentially the entire loop, right? You think about it, like the parents' operating system is inherited from their family, right? They just grew up that way. This is what their family told them, and it got passed on from generations without any question. The parents then enact on that behavior through the parents' OS. Then the child that they have, right, the children, they're raised in the same exact similar environment that the parents grew up in. Within that first 7 years is when the most of the absorption happens in terms of absorbing the behavior, thoughts, feelings, activities from the parents. And then that comes into the child's identity, right? Then it moves into them becoming adults. And then now they're emulating that as adults in terms of their patterns. And then it's all repeated and then pressed on and passed on to the next generation. And so when you can think about this and look at it as just a loop, just architecture, just structure, like a container that it's within, you can then start to become aware and realize that this is all just a simple pattern. This is just structure. This is just architecture that you can easily edit, modify, right? You can change around the pieces, right? But you have to become aware. You have to go into that room, that dark lit room, and turn on the light switch so you can see it, right? Think about like zooming out and looking at it within a container and just looking at, okay, here's my parents, here's how they were and how they are and how they grew up, and then what they taught me and what then I learned, right? And then what then I stepped into my identity with all of those thoughts, feelings, emotions, perspectives, right? Environments. And then I'm reinforcing that into my reality. And then now my children, right? Like, look at all of that. And once you are able to see it that way, that it's just patterns, it's just cycle, you can change it, you can update it, you can modify it so that it has a cycle that you want to play out. And let me show you the 4 layers that this loop operates in, because once you're able to see it, it's going to make the world a difference for you, because you can't change what you can't see. So number 1 is the emotional OS. This is the emotional operating system. Number 2, this is the belief OS. The beliefs in terms of whether you have limitations, whether you believe that you can do something, right? Whether your family believe that they can do something, all of that is passed down to you, whether you have limiting or empowering. But more often than not, you're going to have limiting beliefs, because they're all passed down. So number 3, then you have behavioral OS. This is all your behaviors, your actions, your activity, why you do certain things, right? Like think about family dishes that are passed on. Just, you make certain salsas, certain chilies, certain recipes, right? All of the behaviors that you have in terms of maybe you act a certain way around certain people. Maybe you look down upon certain people. Maybe you think that stepping out of your comfort zone is a no-no, because you can risk being embarrassed. You can risk, putting yourself out there. And what if you go out there and you try and you fail, and then what are people going to think? So the behavior is an operating system that's also inherited. And then number 4, ultimately, this is the most important, most powerful, your identity OS. So this is essentially how you see yourself, right? In terms of an individual who's living, existing in this reality, the story, the narrative that you have for yourself as a character here on this planet, on Earth. And every generational pattern runs through these 4 layers. Let me break each one of these down, and I'm going to use an example so you can see how they stack on top of each other in a person's life. So layer 1, this is the emotional OS. This is the deepest layer here, because your emotions play such a big factor in your reality. And this is the first thing that you inherit from your family. And this is what your family emotionally normalized. And it's not necessarily what they taught you with word, but what they taught you with energy, right? A lot of times it was just you observing them, how they reacted to certain things, right? Did they get upset on certain occasions, for certain small things, for certain big things? Like, how did they act and react to situations and circumstances in their life, right? You perhaps didn't necessarily learn through them telling you, it was just through observation. So let me give you an example. So let's say we have somebody named Marcus. We have Marcus, who is 28 years old, and he's smart, he's motivated, he wants to build a business, he wants to find a great relationship, and ultimately he wants to create a better life than what he experienced himself. But here's the thing. Marcus grew up in a house where anxiety was the baseline emotional temperature. And it wasn't like dramatic anxiety where the family experienced panic attacks, anxiety attacks, where they had to have like a little brown paper bag and blow in and blow out. It was nothing like that. It was just a quiet, constant tension in the house that could be felt. His mother worried about everything, bills, safety, what the neighbors thought. And his father dealt with stress by just becoming silent, where he was emotionally disappearing for days on end. It's not that he was just not physically there, it's that he wasn't there emotionally. He wasn't there in terms of his presence, right? Like, think about this. Like, you can be in a place, but not be presently there, like your mind somewhere else. And this is kind of the experience that Marcus had. And think about it. Like, there wasn't somebody in the house that said, hey, you should be anxious. Nobody sat Marcus down and was like, hey, you should really look at suppressing your emotions. But here's the thing. All of that was absorbed naturally, inherently, unconsciously, without him being aware of it, right? So remember, it's not necessarily what you hear, what you're told in terms of your family telling you to do this, to not do that, right? You're always absorbing as you're growing up what your family, what your parents are doing, not what they're saying. And so ultimately what his nervous system learned was that the world is threatening, emotions are dangerous, and silence is safety. And now that Marcus is 28, he doesn't know why he feels a low-grade sense of anxiety every single day. He doesn't know why his chest gets tight when he checks his bank account. He doesn't know why he closes off or goes quiet when his girlfriend tries to talk to him about something emotional. And so he's left thinking that this is just who I am, but it's not. It's his emotional operating system that was inherited, not chosen. With the emotional OS, you have inherited the energy signatures of your parents in terms of the emotional processing that they did or did not do, which then ultimately shapes how your nervous system reacts to life. The fear, the anxiety, the chaos, the anger, the silence, the suppression, the self-sacrifice, whatever your family normalized emotionally, that became the default operating system of your nervous system. And it's running right now beneath every decision that you make. Let's talk about number 2, the belief operating system. This is the stories, okay, that your family taught you and told you about life. Think about the stories about money, about love, about success, about fulfillment, about relationships, like all of these different stories and narratives that your family taught you and that you grew up with, you then naturally adopted without question. And so let's go back to the Marcus individual here, the Marcus story. So Marcus, growing up, every time that he wanted something or he wanted to get a new toy or get something new, right? His mother would always say, almost like a reflex, like, hey, we can't afford that. And it wasn't always about big things. She said it about new pairs of shoes, about eating out, about school field trips. And she said it so often that he took that in as a statement of not just matter of fact, but a statement of like, this is our identity. This is the identity that we cannot afford that. And then that was just naturally adopted. And so this became the identity about them as a family in terms of something's coming up, we want something, right? We cannot afford it. And then his father had a different phrase that he would say. Whenever Marcus got excited about a business, about a new opportunity, about a new idea, or something to, make money or just expand and just get out of that normal standardized container, his father would always say that that's not for people like us. And it wasn't said maliciously. He wasn't trying to crush them. It was just what he thought that the family, himself, right, the father, that what they and he genuinely believed in, right? This is what the father genuinely believed, not from a malicious standpoint, not from trying to crush down the dreams. It was just like, this is what I believe. And so it is what it is, because his father said the same thing to him. So now he is just doing the same thing all over again to his son. And the pattern will continue to be repeated to Marcus's son if he doesn't fix it. But you're going to be able to fix it because you're watching this video. And so this all comes down to those belief patterns, right? Those programs that were accepted. Money is scarce. Don't put yourself out there. Success is for other people. It's not for people like us. We're not entrepreneurs. We're not business owners. Life is hard. Don't dream too big because you don't want to get disappointed. You don't want to get hurt. Don't try to get out of your comfort zone because you can get embarrassed. You could fail. And what are other people going to think about you? Think about the family, right? All of these different belief patterns. And Marcus didn't consciously choose these belief patterns. He absorbed them, right? He inherited them. They seeped into his operating system through repetition, through the emotional weight behind the words, and through watching his parents live as if these were true. And so now, Marcus, being 28, every time he thinks about investing or betting on himself, there's a voice in the back of his mind that says, this is not for people like us. That's the belief operating system that's inherited. These narratives become identity codes, deeply embedded ideas that direct how you see and interact with the world. And most people never question them because they don't even know that they were installed. Now let's talk about the behavioral OS, okay? These are the habits and the coping strategies that you did not choose. You absorbed them as survival tools. And because Marcus grew up in a household where emotions were suppressed and money was scarce, he developed specific behavioral programs to survive that environment. He learned to people please because keeping everybody calm meant keeping the peace. If mom wasn't anxious and dad wasn't silent, the house felt safe. So Marcus became the kid who made everybody feel comfortable at the cost of his own needs. He learned to avoid conflict at all costs because in his house, conflict meant that there was emotional shutdown. Someone would go silent for days. So Marcus learned that disagreements equals abandonment. Better to swallow what you feel than risk someone withdrawing. He learned to overwork because his father modeled that the only acceptable behavior to financial stress was to grind harder, not to think differently, not to invest, not to grow, just to work more hours. So now Marcus thinks that you have to work super hard to relieve any financial stress, right? That eliminates his ability to think outside the box and look at investments, look at business, entrepreneurship, right? Starting something on his own, because he learned from his father that if you want to make more money, if you want to relieve financial stress, you gotta just put in more hours. So now he's boxed in. And remember, he didn't consciously choose any of these behaviors. They were survival tools in a childhood environment. But now they're running his adult life, and they're keeping him trapped in the same cycle that his parents lived. And so remember for yourself, you didn't choose these behaviors. You absorbed them as survival tools. The people pleasing, the conflict avoidance, the overworking, the self-sabotage, the self-abandonment, all of these that Marcus learned from his parents, right, were all just naturally accepted and absorbed without him questioning it, because he just didn't know, he wasn't aware. And this is for most of us, right? We don't necessarily know and think about all these different things that are happening, right? We have so much in the external world to worry about in terms of the school, the people, what are they going to think about us? Like, I got to work on this, I got to work on that, I got to go to work. So rarely do we ever stop to self-reflect and question our lives, because then we have to face the harsh truth or the reality that maybe these things that have been happening in our lives are patterns that were absorbed, right, and integrated without our knowledge, and then it will shatter us in terms of the identity of who we are if we ever question it and try to fix it, right? But there has to be a want, a need, like an actual conscious, deliberate action to want to change this, because most people, they don't really care. I think honestly, like, I think most people that are just kind of naturally, organically running these programs that they inherited, maybe they want to change and maybe they want something to, you know, be different in their lives, but I don't think that they have the conscious awareness to really understand that they were inherited, and that their family, their mom, their dad did something to them, and they have this bitterness towards them. They have these grudges that they hold towards their mom or their dad or their family members because they did this or they said that, or they treated them a certain way, without realizing that actually it was just what the parents inherited, right? But they're taking all of that personally, and they're not able to accept, acknowledge that it is what it is, so that they can fix the programming. But you're different. That's why you're here. That's why you're watching this video, because you want to change, you want to break this, and you want to rewrite these patterns. Okay, so now let's go over the identity OS. This is the most important, deepest layer, because this identity OS, think about this as like the main operating system on the computer. So think about if you got a PC, the Microsoft Windows 11, right? That's like the main operating system. Then you have a Mac, right? And then you have like the Linux software. That is the main operating system for the actual device to work, right? To function. And all these other ones, the emotional, the belief, and the behavioral, those are like applications within the actual computer itself, right? The device, right? But this is the main one here, the identity. This is who you believe you are. And this is the core of what people call the curse. This is the identity that you've constructed based on everything beneath it. Your emotions, your beliefs, your behaviors, all fused together in a sense of who you must be in order to belong, to survive, to be loved, to be safe. And Marcus has lived 28 years inside these 4 layers. And the identity that they built is this: I'm someone who struggles. That's just who I am. Now, think about this. This is extremely powerful, because it's enlightening to know that all of this, right, caused him to have this type of perspective and acceptance in terms of his identity, and that he may not even be consciously aware of it, but he's going through life unconsciously, and this is what he is unconsciously saying and acting and doing and behaving, right? In terms of when something comes his way for an opportunity, or when something, happens in terms of, let's say he finds a great partner and it's exactly what he wants and what he's been looking for, and they have great connection, but then he finds some way, somehow, to screw it up, to mess it up, which leads him to struggle because that is his default, that is his identity, and that's what he's accepted and what he's acknowledged unconsciously, right? Because, think about it, right? We're not obviously going to accept this. Like, we don't honestly think that we are people that struggle, right? Like, this is unconscious, right? In terms of the patterns. And so he doesn't even know it, but what ends up happening is everything that he does now is just self-sabotage, because this system, this identity statement here that's running unconsciously is driving everything that he does, and he's not aware of it, but it's the root code that the operating system is running on. And so all those different things that he learned growing up, right, in terms of you have to work hard to make a lot of money, you can't really put yourself out there because you're going to potentially risk getting embarrassed or failing, and then what are people going to think about you? And you got to self-sacrifice yourself, you got to people please, because if you put yourself first, then what are others going to say? What are others going to think? That you're selfish, and all these different things that come into play into you not actually wanting to have confrontations, to step out of your comfort zone, because everyone that you grew up around thought this way. And so now you have inherited that code. And the deepest question driving his identity operating system, the question that's underneath everything, is who must I be? Okay, who must I be to not recreate my parents' pain? This is a powerful question that's being had, okay, underneath everything, underneath it all. And think about it. Marcus isn't necessarily living his own life. He's unconsciously trying to solve his parents' problems by becoming whoever he thinks would have prevented their suffering. And in doing so, he's recreating all of their entire patterns that he's trying to escape from. That is a generational curse, not magic, not fate, not a hex, not bad luck. It's 4 layers of programming: emotional, belief, behavior, and identity, stacked on top of each other, running without your permission, shaping everything that you think, feel, and do. So remember, you're not cursed. You're just conditioned through all of these different patterns, all of these different cycles, these loops. And it all starts with these 4 operating systems. But it's one massive loop that starts with your parents' behaviors, then come into your child environment in terms of you growing up within the first 7 years. Then it becomes your identity. Then it becomes your identity as an adult with your actions, your activity. And then the reality is repeated. And then everything gets passed over and redone all over again, right? So it's this pattern that has been running and is currently running. And now that you're aware, you can change this programming. And let me show you how. So now let's walk through the break free framework. So this is a framework that I developed in terms of showing you how to reprogram all of these different patterns, these loops, right? All of these different programming that's been going on that you inherited, right? How can we break free from all of this? This is extremely powerful, and I'm excited for you to see it. So there's 5 key steps here that I want to walk through with the break free framework. So number 1, awareness. You have to become aware of what's going on. Number 2 is the extraction. Number 3, you're rebuilding. Number 4, replacement. And then number 5, this is the embodiment. And so this is what I call the break free framework. And we're going to walk through each one of these individually. These are 5 steps to sever the generational loop and build a new operating system from the ground up. I'm going to walk you through each one and show you how Marcus can apply each one. So number one, this is the awareness. You cannot break, okay, what you can't see. You have to be able to see the pattern. You have to go into the dark room and flip that light on so you can see what's going on. And most people never take the step because it's very, very difficult to face problems, right? To face your fears, to face the uncomfortable. They feel all these different things, the anxiety, the self-sabotage. They feel all of these things and they're doing all of these things, but they're not tracing it back to what could it be, to perhaps their mother, their father, their environment. They're just kind of letting things happen and they're just like, this is who I am. They notice the self-sabotage whenever they want to have relationships, whenever they want to start a business, whenever they want to get outside of their comfort zone, but they don't stop and think about and tie it back to their parents' beliefs, their father's beliefs about success. And they feel that something is off, but they just don't know quite what it is. They can't put their finger on it. And awareness means asking 4 key questions. Number 1, what emotional patterns did I inherit? Number 2, what beliefs are truly not mine? And then number 3, what behaviors feel automatic but don't serve me? And then number 4, what identities am I holding that I never consciously chose? These 4 questions are extremely powerful for you to become aware and start to notice what's going on behind the scenes. And for Marcus, this is a moment that he sits down and he realizes, my anxiety isn't a personality trait. It's my mother's emotional signature running on my nervous system. My fear of success isn't some character flaw. It's my father's belief. That's not for people like us. That was installed in me before I even had any awareness or ability to question it. That realization, that moment of seeing that code, is where everything begins to shift. Not because it fixes anything yet, but because for the first time, you see the pattern that was given to you, not something that is you. And that distinction changes everything. And then step number 2, this is the extraction. This is where you are separating yourself from the pattern. So for here, this is where you're creating psychological distance between your core self and the inherited patterns. Okay? Here's how this works. So when you can separate yourself from an action, an activity, an emotion, a belief, a thought, right? When you can separate yourself and as being separate, that's when everything changes for you in terms of being able to separate yourself from that actual belief, activity, action, whatever it may be. Because oftentimes people are like, hey, I'm just hard-headed. This is just the way that I am. I'm an angry person. I have a short temper. I'm a people pleaser. And not necessarily say that out loud, but more of an unconscious pattern that they naturally people please. They don't like confrontation. When you can separate yourself from that, that's when you can really start to isolate everything and be like, okay, I'm not that. That is something separate. This is just an attribute, right? A characteristic that is running and is there, but I'm not that as an individual, as an identity, right? So very, very powerful here, because we think about Marcus. When Marcus goes through all of this here, right? Let's go back here and write Marcus. When he goes back and he starts to realize and start to catching himself here, experiencing all of this in terms of he's noticing the anxiety when he's checking his bank account. He's feeling his chest get tight. And instead of drowning in that and accepting that and just letting it linger, he pauses and he says, this is my mother's fear. This is not mine. And just that right there, in and of itself, that awareness, that statement, I mean, that will just relieve a huge boulder, right? A huge chip off his shoulder, right? Like, it's just a massive weight that's just being uplifted, right? And being removed, because once you can accept and acknowledge something, you regain the power over it. So he's acknowledging that this is his mother's fear. This is not mine. He notices himself in terms of self-sabotage. He's thinking about blowing off a client meeting because he's shy, or he's not prepared, or he's just doesn't feel like it. He notices picking a fight with his girlfriend when everything is going smoothly, and he stops and he reflects on that, and he says, this is the behavior OS that I accepted and acknowledged and absorbed without me being aware, and it's keeping me small. This pattern was installed. It wasn't chosen. And remember, this is not about blaming your parents at all, whatsoever. Like, you should have the mentality and mindset of, you know what? My parents, and all their unique flaws and all the different things that happened, like, they were just running the operating system that their parents taught them, right? They were just running inherited code as well. So it's not their fault, right? The scarcity, the anxiety, all of these different things that I inherited, or you inherited, whatever that may be, that I inherited or that Marcus inherited, right, was all just there from the parents' initial programming that they received from their parents. Now, keep in mind, extraction doesn't delete the pattern automatically, but it breaks down the automatic identification with it. It helps you start to reflect and think about it. And even while you're in the action, like, what happened here? Why did I react that way? And when you can start to see that and notice that, that's the whole point here. Because when you're able to observe versus identify with that action, with that inherited belief, operating system, whatever that may be, then that's where things change for you, because you're able to start to reflect upon that and think about it, and then start to slowly correct that. And then number 3, this is where we're going to be rebuilding, okay? We want to construct the identity that we choose. This is where you stop reacting to who you were conditioned to be, and start designing who you choose to become. This is where you're deliberately creating your identity, your reality, right? And it's all about conscious creation here. This is about building your identity 2.0. And this is where you want to start asking yourself these questions here. Number 1, who am I without these old patterns? Number 2, what version of me breaks this chain permanently? And then number 3, what does freedom feel like in my nervous system? And in terms of you thinking about what version of me, right, is going to be breaking this chain permanently, this is where you want to be thinking about it from the future version of you. What is that future version of yourself 2.0? Okay? How are they thinking about this? How are they seeing this? How are they reacting to situations and circumstances that you normally would freak out or get anxious or self-sabotage? How would they be reacting and acting upon those situations and circumstances versus how you're acting now, right? And the different patterns and everything that you have going on at this current moment. So really thinking about that future version of yourself and running them in terms of how you want to be, running them through all the different scenarios and experiences that you're having in your current life. And for Marcus, this is the most powerful step here, because for the last 28 years, his identity has been that I'm somebody who struggles. This is just who I am. And now he gets to ask, who would I be if this program wasn't running? And the answer starts to form, not all at once, but piece by piece. Think about this. So now he's thinking and saying, I would be somebody who communicates instead of shutting down. I would be someone who doesn't need to sacrifice himself to be loved. I would be somebody who creates, not just survives. This is the new identity. You don't just remove the old code, you rewrite the new code. You design the person that you want to become with the same level of intentionality that the old program was installed with, except this time you're the architect. And then number 4, this is the replacement. So this is where we're installing a new emotional and behavioral operating system. So this is where you take your new identity from a concept and take it into daily practice. Okay? This is where you're not just thinking differently. You're installing new emotional and behavioral operating programs to replace the old ones, where you're going from fear to grounded stability, from silence to open communication, from chaos to clarity and structure, from survival mode to conscious creation, from self-abandonment to self-leadership. For Marcus, this is what it looks like. When anxiety rises, instead of spiraling out of control, he breathes, he grounds. Like, one of the most important things that I love to teach and that I do myself and that I really recommend for really calming your nervous system anytime you feel anxiety, fear, doubt, whatever it may be, okay, is the breathing, where you want to breathe in, so you want to breathe in and hold for 3 to 5 seconds. Then you want to breathe out for 3 to 5 seconds. And you're doing this consistently 4 or 5 times, okay? Anytime that you're experiencing a situation where you're just full of anxiety or just fear, whatever it may be, okay? A negative emotion that you don't want to be experiencing, okay? Do that, and that will change the game for you, will calm your nervous system. So now, Marcus is doing that, which is then reminding himself that he's safe, he's okay. When his girlfriend wants to talk about something emotional, instead of going silent like his father used to do, he stays present and he says, I'm here. Tell me what you're feeling. And even if it's uncomfortable, that's the important thing here. Like, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's expected, because you can't not have friction, a little bit of chaos. That's going to be there naturally, organically, for you to be able to get to that next level and grow. So for him, this is replacing the silence with open communication. And when he's working and he's getting overwhelmed, instead of grinding harder and just putting in more hours, like his father used to do and father used to say, he's pausing and he's prioritizing and he's asking, what really matters here? What's most important? What are the 5 things that need to really get done right now? And so with that, he's replacing the chaos with clarity. And keep in mind, these are not personality changes. These are OS upgrades. Each time Marcus chooses a new response, he's overriding an old line of code. And over time, with consistency, the new code, right, the new operating system becomes the actual default. And then number 5, this is the embodiment. So this is where you become the first in your line, in your bloodline, to question everything and to embody it. And this is where the curse actually ends, okay? This is where we're embodying the new identity. And the curse finally ends, because what happens is, remember when we had that pattern here, the cycle, right? Of it comes from your parents' operating system, your parents inherited, then you inherited, and then you become an adult, and then you repeat the patterns, and it's all just this self-fulfilling pattern cycle, right? So when you essentially embody this now, and you have this awareness, and you've changed the script, you've updated and upgraded the code now, right? Now, when you have your children and they grow up and they experience you in terms of what you're doing, how you're going about your life, your experiences, your emotions, your perceptions, your behaviors, right? All of that, they're going to inherit that, but they're going to inherit new code, updated code, code that is uplifting, that's powerful, that is beneficial, right? There's none of that limiting beliefs anymore, none of those self-sabotaging behaviors, none of that, because now you know that this is just an operating system that has been running. And since I updated and upgraded this operating system, now for all of my future children, they're going to have this new operating system. And then their children are going to have this operating system. So now we've broken the curse, the loop, all of it. And this new embodiment, this new identity becomes true and realized through actual behavior. And so let's look at Marcus 6 months in. So he's updated and upgraded the operating system in terms of his emotions, his behaviors, his environment, his beliefs, all of that, right? But here's the thing, he still feels anxiety sometimes because it doesn't vanish overnight. And that's okay, that's normal. It's supposed to still be there, right? Like, you're never not going to have negative thoughts. You're not never going to have, thoughts that are disempowering, that are limiting. They're still going to be there because they're to test you. and to make sure that you truly want that new identity level. But the difference now is that he catches it immediately and he regulates it. He breathes, right? And then he moves on. And with this relationship, he communicates with this girlfriend very consistently, and it's not perfect, but it's open. He doesn't disappear. He doesn't shut down. He stays present, and he invests in his business without hearing the voice say, "This is not for people like us," because he's already proven over the last 6 months through his behavior that this is indeed for people like him. This is massive. This is huge because he's built up the evidence to counter any negative voice that says, "This is not for people like us," right? It's the evidence that he's built up that really is the most powerful thing here, because he's built up the competence. He's built up the actions, the micro actions that even are just small little tiny minor things that combat that voice that always said that this is not for people like us, because he's proved that voice wrong. And now it's disappeared, it's dissolved, it's no longer there. And here's the part that matters most. I mentioned previously that he has broken the patterns, right? He's broken the curse. And so now when Marcus has his children, they're going to grow up in a house where emotions are regulated, money is discussed with clarity, where communication is open, not silent, where the identity is chosen, not inherited. His children will never ever need to break a generational curse because he did so himself. This is the embodiment. You become the first in your line to live free. And in doing so, you change the operating system for the future generations that follow. You're not defined by the people who came before you. You're the one that they prayed for. You are the one with the awareness, the tools, and the clarity to break what broke them. You're not the end of a broken lineage. You are the beginning of a healed one. You are the architect that chooses what continues, and it ends with you.